From as far back as I can remember, I felt like I wasn't enough. My parents never said it out loud, but they didn't need to. The look in their eyes when I was born, hoping for a boy, told me everything. Then, 4 years later, when my sister Laura came along, I knew for sure. I was Mary, their firstborn daughter, and I wasn't what they wanted. I once overheard Mom telling Dad, maybe the next one will be a boy, after Laura was born. But there wouldn't be a next one. Complications during Laura's birth meant Mom couldn't have more kids. Their dream of having a son was gone, passed on to the hope that one day their daughters might give them grandsons instead. Growing up in our small suburban house, I watched Laura figure out how to get whatever she wanted. She'd flash her big brown eyes, and our parents would melt like butter. I, on the other hand, grew more independent. I knew I wasn't going to get the attention she got, so I learned to rely on myself. While Laura knew exactly how to charm them, I focused on taking care of myself. We had everything we needed: clothes, food, a safe home, and a good education. But love and warmth felt hard to come by, at least for me. Over time, I stopped expecting it. I built my own emotional walls and got used to standing on my own. During my senior year of high school, I told my parents at dinner, I'm going to study economics. They exchanged a look. Are you sure, honey? Mom asked, her fork pausing midair. That's such a technical field. Dad nodded in agreement. What about teaching or nursing? Something more suitable for a young lady. I stood my ground. I've already been accepted to State University. I even got a partial scholarship. Mom sighed. Well, it's your choice, she said, the disappointment in her voice all too familiar by then. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I expected it. Across the table, Laura smirked. I'm thinking of studying psychology, she said. Mom and Dad instantly lit up. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Mom beamed. You've always been so good with people. I pushed my peas around my plate, letting their voices drift past me like background noise. I'd learned a long time ago that trying to win their approval wasn't worth it. Instead, I focused on my future and the freedom college would bring. I met Scott during my 3rd year at State University. He was a senior in the economics department, and we literally bumped into each other in the library. I dropped my statistics textbook, and he picked it up. That's how it all started. You're in Professor Timothy's macroeconomics class, right? He asked, handing me the book. I've seen you asking all the smart questions. I blushed, not used to someone noticing me in a good way. Yeah, that's me. The one who drags class out with questions. Not annoying at all, he smiled. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime. I could tell you about the upper-level courses you'll take next year. That coffee turned into dinner, then movie nights, and soon we were inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Scott didn't compare me to anyone else. He liked me for who I was. When he graduated, Scott got a job at Anderson Consulting while I stayed to finish my degree. He waited for me, and after I graduated, we decided to move in together. We found a small apartment downtown, not fancy, but it was ours. Mom, Dad, this is Scott, I said during his first visit to my parents' house. Their reaction was instant and surprising.
Oh, Scott.
Mom practically squealed. We're so happy to finally meet you. Will you be joining us for Thanksgiving? Christmas? Dad clapped him on the shoulder. Son, we've heard so much about you. Tell me about your job. Mary says you're in finance. The word son caught my attention. Of course, they were finally getting the son they'd always wanted, even if it was through marriage. I watched as they showered Scott with attention, asking about his career and future plans, and when he might want to settle down. Meanwhile, Laura sat in the corner, shooting daggers at us. She was living at home after college, still single, and clearly unhappy that for once, I had something she didn't. She couldn't stand it. A year after we moved in together, during a quiet dinner at home, Scott got down on one knee and proposed. I said yes right away. We decided on a small, intimate wedding, despite my parents pushing for something bigger. It's your big day, Mom argued. Don't you want something more special? This is special, I told her, and for once, I didn't care if it wasn't what she wanted. It was what I wanted. I insisted. This is exactly what we want. The ceremony was perfect, just close friends and family in a small garden. Scott, and I exchanged vows, enjoyed a simple dinner reception, and went back to our apartment as husband and wife. It felt right to start our married life in the same place where we had already built so much together. The question started almost as soon as we got back from our honeymoon. So, when can we expect some good news? Mom would ask, her eyes shining with excitement, hoping for a grandson. We're saving for a house first, I explained over and over. We want to be financially stable before we start a family. Dad would shake his head in disapproval. Your mother and I didn't have much when we started out, and we managed just fine. Every family dinner turned into an update on their friends' growing families. Did you hear the Hendersons just became grandparents again? Another boy. Or, the Smith's daughter announced she's pregnant, and she's younger than you, Mary. After 3 years of saving, Scott and I finally bought our first house. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, or at least ours and the bank's. The moment we signed the mortgage papers, I knew the baby questions would only get worse, and they did. What I didn't expect was Laura's announcement just 5 months later. I'm pregnant, she said during Thursday dinner, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. It's David's. David, her boyfriend of 7 months, was someone none of us really liked. The next few months were chaotic. David disappeared as soon as Laura started showing, leaving her to move back in with our parents. But instead of treating it as a scandal or shame, my parents turned their home into a shrine for their future grandchild. When little Angela was born, you'd think she was royalty. My parents converted Laura's old room into a nursery, bought every baby item imaginable, and practically rearranged their entire lives to help raise her. Isn't she perfect? Mom would coo, rocking Angela during our visits. Don't you just want one of your own, Mary? What hurt more than my parents' constant pressure was watching Scott with Angela. He'd get down on the floor to play with her, make silly faces, and spend hours entertaining her with stuffed animals and children's books. Scott is such a natural with children, Mom would say pointedly. He's going to make such a wonderful father. I started tracking my cycle, taking vitamins, and doing everything the pregnancy website suggested. Month after month, we tried, and month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, Scott spent more and more time at my parents' house playing with Angela. She's such a sweet kid, he'd say on our drives home. Did you see her trying to walk? She almost said, Uncle, today? You're so good with her, my mom would gush. Just imagine how amazing you'll be with your own children. I'd smile and nod, but inside, I felt a growing knot of worry. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What if something was wrong? I told myself to be patient, that it would happen when the time was right. After a year of trying with no success, I was still trying to stay hopeful. These things take time, I told myself. But when Mom found out we'd been trying for a year, she panicked. A whole year, Mary? Something's wrong. You need to see a doctor immediately, she insisted. And before I'd even left their house that day, she was already sending me contact info for fertility specialists. To get her off my back, I made an appointment. Scott came with me, holding my hand in the exam room while the doctor asked questions and ran tests, blood work, ultrasounds, and more. Then came the day of the results. The doctor looked at me with a gentle expression. I'm sorry, she said, but the tests show that you're infertile. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. Scott squeezed my hand, but I could barely feel it. The doctor kept talking about options, IVF, adoption, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. That night, Scott and I sat at the kitchen table, picking at our takeout. We can look into adoption or IVF, he said. There are options. I nodded, but I felt hollow inside. How could I tell my family? How would they react? I decided to rip the Band-Aid off at the next family dinner. Mom, Dad, I said during a quiet moment, I need to tell you something. I saw a specialist. I took a deep breath. I can't have children. I'm infertile. The silence that followed was unbearable. Mom's face twisted with disgust. Infertile, she said, almost spitting the word. What kind of woman can't even do the one thing she's supposed to do? Dad wouldn't even look at me. An empty vessel, he muttered. Just a useless flower. Laura sat there smirking, bouncing Angela on her knee. Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is. I looked at Scott, desperate for support, but he just stared at his plate, saying nothing. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I pushed back from the table and ran out of the house, ignoring their voices calling after me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back there. But Scott kept going. He spent time with Angela, chatted with Laura, and listened to my parents. He'd come home full of stories. "Angela learned a new song today," he'd say. "You should have seen her dancing around the living room." Or, "Laura made this amazing lasagna. She's really getting good at cooking." Each word felt like a stab to my heart. At night, I'd lie awake next to him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering if he resented me for not being able to give him children. The guilt consumed me, and it only got worse when he came home with that wistful look in his eyes after playing with Angela. Then came the day everything fell apart. It was a regular Saturday, and I came home early from work, arms full of Chinese takeout, Scott's favorite. But the house was dark and empty. His car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but something felt wrong. I called his phone. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. Laura Thompson posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, but something made me click this time. My stomach dropped as the image loaded. Scott sitting on my parents' couch, Angela in his lap, and Laura pressed up against his side. All three of them were grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys. The logical part of my mind tried to tell me there could be an innocent explanation, but deep down I knew better. The whole drive to my parents' house, my mind replayed every interaction between Scott and Laura over the past year, each one twisting into something ugly. The driveway was full. Mom's car, Dad's truck, and Scott's sedan. The front door was unlocked, as always. I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Voices floated from the living room. "Scott, you know we already think of you as a son," my mom was saying. "And you deserve to be happy. You've been amazing with Angela," Dad added. "And Laura, well, she's young. Fertile. You could have more children together. Why stay trapped in a marriage with—" My mom's voice dropped, but I still heard the disgust in it. "A barren woman." I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I burst into the room, making them all jump. The scene was like a nightmare. My parents and Laura sitting on one couch, Scott in Dad's armchair, and Angela playing on the floor between them. They looked like one big, happy family, planning to cut me out. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded. My voice came out stronger than I expected.
Scott looked ashamed, at least.
But my parents? They didn't even try to hide it. "Mary," Mom said, standing up with her chin held high, "we're just having an honest discussion about what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister." "Well, someone has to think about his future," Dad said sharply. "You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves. Laura can." I turned to Scott, waiting for him to defend me, to stand up for our marriage, to tell them they were wrong. But he just stared at the floor. "Scott," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Mary," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "But they're right. I want children, a family, and I've developed feelings for Laura." Laura smirked, reaching out to put her hand on Scott's arm. "You don't belong here anymore," she said smugly. "This is my family now." I looked around the room, at my dad's stern disapproval, my mom's cold satisfaction, Laura's triumphant smile, and Scott's guilty expression. Years of marriage and a lifetime of family ties meant nothing to them. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I drove home in a daze, packed a suitcase without thinking, and left a note for Scott. "File for divorce.
My lawyer will contact yours."
The divorce was quick and impersonal. We split everything evenly. I moved into a small apartment across town and threw myself into work, trying to forget. But social media wouldn't let me. One morning during a coffee break, a coworker gasped at her phone. "Oh my God, Mary, I'm so sorry. I forgot to unfollow your sister." She tried to hide her screen, but I'd already seen it. Laura in a huge white wedding dress, Scott in a tux, and my parents smiling proudly beside them. "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't. "I hope they're happy." 2 years later, another post popped up. "Welcome, baby Shirley." My replacement had given them the daughter they'd always wanted. Scott now had his perfect family, Angela, who he'd adopted, and his new baby with Laura. That day, I deleted all my social media accounts. But life has a funny way of surprising you. One Sunday, I was shopping for groceries when my cart accidentally bumped into someone else's.
"I'm so sorry," a deep voice said.
I looked up and saw the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm Steven," he said, helping me gather my scattered groceries. "Can I buy you coffee to make up for being a klutz?" One coffee turned into dinner, then dating, and before I knew it, I was falling in love again. This time, I promised to be honest from the start. "I need to tell you something," I said one night, 7 months into our relationship. "I can't have children. I'm infertile." Steven took my hands in his and looked into my eyes. "Mary, I love you," Steven said, holding my hands. "If we want kids someday, we'll adopt, or we won't. It doesn't matter. I just want you." We got married in a small courthouse ceremony, just us and a few close friends. No family drama, no fancy dress, no big expectations, just love. A year into our marriage, I started feeling strange, nauseous in the mornings, dizzy at random times. Steven insisted I see a doctor. "Mrs. Anna," the doctor said, looking at my test results, "congratulations. You're pregnant." I stared at her, stunned. "That's impossible. I'm infertile. I have tests to prove it." She smiled gently. "The human body is mysterious. Sometimes, despite all odds, pregnancy happens, even in cases of diagnosed infertility. It's rare, but it happens." That night, Steven and I cried together. Tears of joy, disbelief, and hope. I didn't tell my family. They had lost the right to share in my happiness. 10 months later, I held my son in my arms, a perfect, beautiful baby boy weighing 9 pounds, 7 ounces. Steven and I named him Jack, meaning defender of mankind. As I looked at his tiny face, I felt nothing but pure love, no bitterness, no anger, no regrets. Life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. Jack thrived, and Steven was the most loving father. I had everything I'd ever dreamed of. We rarely went out, preferring quiet family dinners at home, but one night we decided to celebrate Steven's promotion at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, it was Laura, my sister, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who was definitely not Scott. They were tucked into a corner booth, but not well enough hidden. She was running her fingers through his hair, kissing him deeply, completely unaware of the world around them. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and discreetly took several photos. The lighting was dim, but the images were clear enough. There was no mistaking what was happening. "Mary?" Steven touched my arm. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." I showed him the photos. "That's Laura," I said, my voice low. "With someone who isn't her husband." Steven's jaw tightened. He knew everything what Laura and Scott had done to me. "Are you going to send those to him?" he asked. My finger hovered over the send button. It would be so easy. One click, and I could destroy their perfect little family just like they'd destroyed mine. But after a moment, I shook my head and saved the photos to a secure folder. "No," I said quietly. "I'm better than them." A year passed. Jack grew into a bright, beautiful boy with Steven's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. We were visiting a friend in my old neighborhood, something I rarely did. Since the weather was nice, we decided to walk to a nearby park. That's when it happened. Just our luck, as we rounded the corner near the supermarket, there they were, Mom, Dad, Laura, and Scott, loading groceries into their car. We saw them at the same time they saw us. Their first reaction was to turn away, noses in the air, pretending we were strangers. But then their eyes fell on Jack, who was holding my hand and happily chatting about the toy truck he'd brought to play with at the park. Mom froze in her tracks. Who is this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I could have ignored them. I probably should have. But something made me stop. "This is my son, Jack," I said, my voice calm and steady. Laura let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. We all know you can't have kids. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I looked her straight in the eye, enjoying the moment. "I gave birth to him 4 years ago. No adoption agency involved." "That's impossible," Mom stammered. "The doctors were wrong," I said, cutting her off. "It happens sometimes. Rare, but it happens. And here's the proof." I gestured to Jack, who was watching the strangers curiously. Dad's eyes widened. "A grandson." "We have a grandson," he said, stepping forward. Mom followed, her arms outstretched like she had every right to embrace my child. I stepped in front of Jack, blocking their way. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to throw me away like garbage and then claim my son as your grandson. You lost that privilege when you betrayed me." Laura's face turned an ugly shade of red as she saw our parents' attention shift to Jack. She had always been their favorite after they cast me aside, and now she couldn't stand it. "Oh, get over yourself, Mary," she spat. "So, you managed to pop out one kid. Big deal. I still won in the end. I got your husband. I gave him a real family, 3 beautiful daughters. Face it, I'm still better than you'll ever be." My hand was on my phone before she even finished her rant. "Speaking of family, Laura," I said calmly, "why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" "What are you talking about?" Scott asked, his eyes narrowing. I pulled up the photos from the restaurant and held out my phone. "Here's your loving wife," I said, "having dinner with someone else." Though dinner might not be the right word for what was really going on. "I have to say, Laura," I said calmly, "most people don't kiss their dinner companions." The color drained from Laura's face as Scott grabbed the phone from my hand. Mom and Dad crowded around to look, their mouths falling open in shock. "Who is he?" Scott demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Laura stammered, He's just a friend from work." "Friends don't kiss like that," I replied coolly. "And they certainly don't meet in dark corners of expensive restaurants while their spouses are at home with the kids." "Laura, how could you?" Mom gasped. "After everything." "Everything?" I laughed bitterly. "After you helped her steal my husband? After you threw me away because you thought I couldn't have children? Karma's something, isn't it?" Scott and Laura were shouting at each other by then, their voices echoing through the parking lot. I turned to Jack, who was still holding my hand, blissfully unaware of the chaos around him. "Come on, sweetie," I said gently. "Let's go to the park." We walked away, leaving them to their disaster. Jack happily chattered about the slides and swings, completely unaware of the storm we'd just left behind. 2 months later, I heard the rest of the story through the neighborhood gossip. After discovering Laura's affair, Scott got himself tested. The results showed he was infertile and had been all along, which meant baby surely couldn't possibly be his. Furious, he left Laura immediately and refused to pay support for either Shirley or Angela. Laura ended up moving back in with our parents, her perfect life in pieces. Then the calls started. Emails. Even unexpected visits to my house. "Please, Mary," Mom begged through the door one day. "We made a terrible mistake. Let us be part of Jack's life. He's our only grandson." "You should have thought about that," I replied calmly, "before you called me an empty vessel. Actions have consequences." Stephen stood by my side completely. "Family isn't about DNA," he said one night as we watched Jack building with his blocks. "It's about love, respect, and loyalty. They didn't show you any of those." He was right, of course. Looking at my little family, my wonderful husband who loved me for who I was, my miracle son who proved the doctors wrong, and our home filled with laughter, I knew I had everything I needed. Sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to have. Sometimes, you have to build your own with people who choose you back. I chose Stephen and he chose me. We chose Jack, and he chose us right back, with his first smile, his first word, and his first steps. That's what real family is. And I wouldn't have it any other way.